So some are still coming. And je fais passer la liste présente et quelqu'un So maybe let's start.
Okay.
And after you, Alessandro. So Alessandro, with an introduction of introduction, is a member of a team and is introducing you.
Of course. We can start with the last session of the day. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Andromache Karanika. It's a professor in Irvine, in California. And most part of her research has focused on the ancient Greek poetics and the relationship with the women's oral tradition. And she also published many papers about topics like poetics, folklore, folk songs, and lamentation. And thank you in advance for your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's a great pleasure to be joining you from the Pacific zone here. I wish I could be there with you. So what I did is I prepared a kind of a small intervention as we talked with Véronique. And the idea is that these are some thoughts. No, they need more work in order to become a proper paper, but I look forward to any comments and thoughts and ideas about it. So I'm starting with Plato's Cratylus, where Socrates refers to the name of God Dionysus as a name in playfulness for the god who gave wine. So Dionysos is equated with Dionysos in an attempt to etymologize an act which seeks to find the true nature of words. He then says that even the gods like to play, and he uses the beautiful word philopaismones. Véronique, I don't know if you have my text in front of you.
Yes, some people have it.
Excellent, yeah. So games and play on words are deeply intertwined. The sophists, more than others, emphasize play, and as Danjou put it, transferred it from symposia and other activities to that of verbal skill, ultimately becoming masters of play. Play on words, on moral values, on distinctions between illusion and reality. Sophistic education was primarily focused on word manipulation in a trend that dominated the Athenian classical popular production. From this perspective, it becomes very intriguing when games as a genre of performance in children's but also adult lives attract special attention in scholarly, lexicographic, and encyclopedic writing, so that we know quite a bit on them from later times. I don't think there is any need to repeat what is well known in this group of all groups in the world, namely that Pollux's dictionary is considered to be onomasiological, in the sense that we have entries not alphabetically but organized, but following a conceptual classification. This registry also shows us the kind of literary trends that have filtered the information presented and is particularly relevant concerning several games. Pollux's Onomasticon, for the most part, is a registry of variant words. In fact, one could even say, once again in a highly speculative mode, that this was a part of a game when the entry word is followed by as many synonyms as possible, a kind of a Scrabble, or proliferation of words with meanings that are close to each other. He himself, in a programmatic manner, writes that his Onomasticon is to find as many synonyms as possible. Yet these, when describing games, Pollux gives less synonyms and more of a list of different types of games. This group knows too well the order. Symposiastic games, such as the Kotabus, then ball games, like the Faininda, and then he gives the names of other games based on the distinct suffix, the inda, and then moves to those which end with the suffix ismos, like ephedrismos, chalkasmos, askoliasmos, and finally moving on to some that I like to call theatrical or tag games, like the Melilonthi, Kelikeloni, and the Psita. For most of the latter, but of course not exclusively, he gives the tag lyrics that were going around. And I'm sorry I missed Martin's presentation earlier. Typically, for Pollux, he performs his knowledge, namely he enters in a game himself to give literary attestations which either allude or have an overt reference to a game. For the latter, comedy gives the most material, as for the game of Melolonthi, referred to in Aristophanes' Clouds, or the Kinitinda, referred to in Crates in his play Paidii. Yet Pollux takes us on a literary journey also to Homer in his ball games, and an episode in the Phaeacians, Book 8, an allusion to Plato's Phaedrus with his reference to Ostrakinda and a phrase the players would utter, night, day. Nux Chimera. Likewise, he gives the phrase the players of Muinda, a kind of a hide and seek, which would be Fulatu, something that could still until this day kids play around the world saying guard yourself. Now, this very brief overview gives a sketch of what Pollux is doing. He's showcasing his erudition by not just giving us lists of games, but also their occasional presence in literature that he knew, but also goes out of his way to collect and explain different types of games in a way that can trick us, as he may seem like an anthropologist or an ethnomusicologist interested in utterances, rhymes, and variations of games. Of the names that he gives, Ostrakinda and Phaeninda are attested in earlier sources, not named by Pollux himself, in Aristophanes' Equites and Antiphanes respectively, which is interesting because he does not mention those particular authors for this particular game. Yet, if we look at it from a more panoptic perspective, namely from the entirety of this edition of Pollux' Onomasticon, and compare this with other parts of his work, and what I was doing yesterday, I was looking randomly. It was almost like I was playing a game myself when I was writing this. I almost would like us all to do it. Like you look into random pages to see how many literary attestations he has. So when he talks about games, he actually has, interestingly, less literary attestations compared to his usual ethos, with the exception of the presentation of the astragalon. In most of his other references, he offers a treasure of references to what probably was in the library he had access to, in a method of backing up his synonyms or words through a literary attestation in the good grammarian's way. Far less so for his games, though. As Pollux' Onomasticon is conceptual, as we mentioned, it is worth exploring what goes in the mind of the author or editor who arranged this group. From symphotic games to ball, and then the Inda, and finally Ismos, and then the action and movement and the girls' games. This passage can be more revealing if we probe more into it. Pollux is making what I like to call a gender move, from the more male world of the symposium to girls' games, which actually give him the opportunity to record not what is a literary attestation, but what appears to be possibly common knowledge or otherwise some known rhymes like the Tortitotos and the Psita. Both these games arguably reflect back on their performance. The more he moves to the world of women, the further he goes away from literary attestations, and the closer he comes to folklore. It is as if he is stepping out for a bit out of his own library. The usual title given to this song game is in the learned list of Pollux is that Kelly Kelone presents the initial gemination, Kelly Kelone, translated typically as torti tortoise, and possibly reflecting what the girls would say. Either this could be a reference to a cry or sound the little girls could produce when actually playing this game as Kelly Kelone, with some kind of rhythm, or it could also refer to a different sound that girls could make, something like catch me. You think of the verb helle, catch me, in what in Greek would sound still at Pollux' time. If that is the possibly etymological thinking behind, then the girl's chief reference point, the tortoise, makes a gesture towards the dominant performative mode, catching tag game, from helle, or reproducing the actual sounds, recording what the girls would shout out during this game. it's such a weird name, could be the recording of some kind of sick kind of utterance that could also be possibly, again, onomatopoeic. The performative element defines etymological thinking in how these games got registered in Pollux. A lot has been written on the games with the suffix "inda." We talked about it briefly in September already. Pierre Chantren had noted back in 1933 how this is really a weird for Greek sort of practices as a kind of a suffix, which it was adverbial, became and is used later in later times more as a noun. And of course, Chantren, quoting the statement by Herodotus, suggested that this has its ultimate origin in Asia Minor, particularly in Lydia, which is not something that would be incongruent with the Herodotean version, that games were invented by Lydians. However, recent linguistic research has argued for a micro-Asiatic origin of the suffix, using an argument the presence in the area of several place names ending in ida, like Sinda, Piginda, Incaria, etc. Paula Dardano has also argued that the suffix idas, which in the Homeric poem forms patronymics and is later recontextualized as a suffix for deriving proper names. Now, most of the Inda games come to us with their first attestation in Pollux, but we don't need to doubt possibly earlier uses. Some games have a distinctive suffix, which, if indeed, as Dardano put it, comes to Greek via Asiatic, or as they put it, with micro-Asiatic origin, then it is worth also thinking how and why this becomes what appears as a suffix connected in thought as a space dedicated to games. Such a spatial reference for a suffix is not something that happens too often, and from that perspective, a connection with, such as the one Dardano made with patronymics, becomes even more intriguing. Games can be seen from early on, not just a very important category on their own, but even more a spectrum of reference that one distinctively identifies as nouns with marked suffixes and invites for further inquiry. It is also noteworthy that these are not games that one plays alone, but they all require a community of players. This further underlines the semantic range that shapes the marked naming. Just like a distinctive name of a place or a patronymic that links family members, games are thought from early on as a referential marker. Games occupy a space of their own and as a performative par excellence topic. This also enables Pollux to move more towards performance and move from the inside to the outside world. Now, going back to my starting point for this brief presentation and the connections in Cratylus between words and games. Pollux attempts to enter words into his own game in his Onomasticon and use them to show his erudition, but also make it an escape to the world of outside. Pollux in his section of games is showing intimate knowledge of games. He presents himself as a philopaism, just like the gods in Plato's Cratylus that I started with. I would like to finish with the part that frames the end of the games section in Pollux, which is something that I'm still trying to figure out why this is going on. He says, so many things were said about games. To them, we will add to fill the book, words about similitude or likeness. And then he starts a list of words like homoios, eoikos, all meaning similar. Attempts to find logic behind Pollux's or his editor's arrangement can be futile. And I'm sorry, again, I missed earlier papers like Stylianos' paper and all the others. But this idea of similitude right after games can be possibly revealing more. Games, very much like drama, which was also at the heart of Pollux's interests elsewhere, are an illusion of reality. They create a world of their own, a community of their own, a space of their own, only to give a brief snapshot of things that will come, lessons in life that will come differently. Games, at the end of the day, are an act of mimesis, and one that fractures time, as they bring what will be brought, can be an illusory preview of things that children will learn. The tortoise game is perhaps the most revealing, as it brings the themes of weaving, lament, something that all adult women knew how to deal with. As Aristotle put it in his Politics, in his prescriptive manner, games should be imitations, mimesis of what things one learns later. We discussed back in September the famous episode for Saint Athanasius, in which he baptized the child, an act that was deemed to be a mimesis of ritual. For adults to play, it means a return to the past, that of childhood, a time of illusion and a break from their present. For children, it is a journey forward. So I will stop here, and I will welcome any more thoughts, comments, questions, and reactions.
So, thank you very much. We can open the debate. So, any question about speech?
About this question of structure, because indeed Stefano Valente, for instance, discussed the question of how is Pollux part about game structure. What do you think of Andromache's proposal?
For the end. It's quite interesting, but I think that Stylianos should answer this question, because he was the one who
give me 1 minute, please. Because I'm looking for a very similar passage in the 4th book on the Technai that we can use as a parallel.
Looking for that yesterday too. I mean, I have my.
Okay, give me 1 minute.
It's an interesting thing when you. I mean, it's such a different experience when you read the section of games, and when you start reading, which a friend of mine calls it's almost perverse. You know, the entire dictionary from beginning to end.
Well. Yes.
Yes, you are.
Can I ask?
Yes, Cleo. Yes. Cleo Guguli.
I'm not a philologist or an archaeologist. I'm an anthropologist. I'm very much interested in the performative aspect of the games that you have talked about. My question is, when you talk about the gender leap, the gender move that Pollux makes when he starts talking about games in Irvine, are you saying that he is, are you assuming that Pollux is actually referring to contemporary girls' games, or is he using an older tradition and referring to performative aspects that he reads through the texts, the sources that he uses? The other question I think has to do with Stylianos' paper and if Pollux is actually interested in the pragmatics of play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this is an excellent question. In fact, in my notes, what I was doing, I was trying to trace throughout his work how he uses the word unit. I mean, the word woman, essentially. And he is pretty consistent with what he does in games. He kind of very often puts a focus on the women. He will say the man and the women. So he does, it's not something he does only for this. I don't think he refers to a performance per se of his own time. I think what he does, he's crystallizing. In a way, he presents a kind of, I want to call it exemplary, sort of, in his own mind. He exemplifies a performance. And he puts it as one there that almost reflects what he thought was happening, is happening, and I'm not sure how really interested he is in the actual sort of historical part, but it is a move that the dictionary makes for him to get out of the usual. Yeah.
Now, I found the reference I was looking for.
Oh, excellent.
First, a general remark. It is obvious that in the Onomasticon there is not a running macro structure for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Even most of the books do not have one macro structure but cover different themes. There are big themes with a macrostructural element, and there are small things that have associative or logical connections or no connections whatsoever. Despite this fact, we can spot an urge that Pollux feels to pretend that he creates logical bridges when he changes the subject. And, and in the seventh book, in the ninth book, we find it constantly. After he's done with Pollux, we see it in the part about coins and weights, where he says, I have talked about coins in the trapezitae part in the fourth book, so uk an eie faulon, to add here more about coins. So the fact that I have treated this thing previously somehow obliges me to complete it and give you more in order to bring the semasiological field in the completion in this ninth book. The same thing with games. He justifies himself, telling, well, I have with a very interesting ideological structure, causal structure, epei, he says, because I treated these and these things in previous books, ukaneie faulon, also to say these things. Now, he has also another pattern to do the same thing, and we find the first instance of this pattern in the fourth book, where he treats the names, the words about technai. And he goes on to statike, and then he wants to go over to geometry. He has set up things about geometria arithmetike, metrike, and statike. And in section 176, he says, there are some words that are common to geometria arithmetike, metritike, statike, being apt more or less to the one or the other. Koina, te men elaton, te de malon prosekonta. And then he plays with this formulation that he created in order to bring about the bridge, and he says, protomen autoto malon. First of these words is the malon itself. Kaito heton, and the heton itself. And I think this is an excellent parallel to the homoios bridge that he creates after the end of the games, because there he plays again, he creates again a formula, a structure that he has created also in the end of the sixth book, where he talks about homoia hu tauton semenonta ala tauton schema tes lexeos echonta, where he puts morphologically similar words in an order, saying, be careful, they don't mean the same thing, but here are 100 or 150 substantives ending in ma. In our case, in the end of the ninth book, we have both of them, synonyms, lists of synonyms, and lists of words that are similar in other respects, but I think the homoios bridge is actually under the urge that he feels to create, even in this very artificial way, something that looks like a logical passage from one thing to another. So I must admit, I don't look at the Onomasticon on a, how to put it, I don't look at the content of the Onomasticon. I read it in order to figure out its patterns, the patterns and the structures it uses. That's why I can read it almost every 3 months from beginning to the end, because I don't really read it. But I think I would read this homoion there in that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This is actually very, very useful. I absolutely agree. I tend to read often in the same way. I would add to this, I mean, I think there's a lot of subtle moments, which I like to call like the connecting little tissues. And I mean, there are somewhere, which exactly what you said, this ukan fablone, you know, it wouldn't be in proportion, but every now and then there are moments like, especially for the 9th book, I mean, he talked about the cities, the parts of the cities and the coins, and then he starts talking about Kotavos, and he moves to this interesting game, the Plintheon Kalei de Pollux. And again, he brings something which is another part of exactly what you're saying, and what I'm trying to say with the homoios. So there are lots of little moments of, again, connecting tissues. Yeah, thank you very much for this.
Another question?
Thank you very much, Andromache, for your paper, for your communication. And I find it very interesting, this perspective of performative and of exemplary in these games. This is like also theatrical piece and performance. This is also for the, there is this also, as you remarked, for the Cheloni, the Torti Tortoise. There is we analyzed with Martin, also with Martin Stariuk, metrical. This is like a little piece of theater in this in the 9th book. And do you think Pollux, it was an aiming of this performative perspective? It was it. Do you think he had the view of recreating or of examining performance and also the rules in the place he was describing, or it's just a result of his previous sources he was collecting? Because you also stated that this was actuality, this was also archaeology, was some Kotavos, for example, we think it was not more played at the time of Pollux, or other plays were still living. So it was a dialectics between what is still actual, still practice, and was his memory, literature, and so to speak, ludic archaeology in this workshop, of the great workshop of Pollux' 9th book. But it was a real aim of investigation, or it was more a result of the sources he was collecting? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you for this, Salvatore. Well, it's something that has been almost bothering me, and this is why I actually gave the title of Erudition and Performance. I mean, for the most part, Pollux goes out of his way to put his sources, to put as many as possible. And this seems to be standing out in this pattern. So it is, and I, of course, I like to see that he's kind of getting a little bit out of his comfort zone, so to speak, by moving to this performative mode. Normally, one would expect to have some kind of reference, and I mean, we do know. I mean, many of us have talked about in different ways. I mean, the Tortis game is an absolute treasure of possible references. I mean, it could be that Pollux didn't know Irina who refers to this. It could be, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what his library would be. But he does go out, and he in a way brings the performative aspect more than the literary. Why he does that, I'm not sure. I mean, again, this is only going to be speculation from now and on. So it is a moment where, in a way, as almost as if the performative, as you said, and I'm saying too, is kind of in clash with the erudite, or getting a little bit of a channel through this super erudite mode, which he has anywhere else. So I'm not quite answering your question, which is an excellent question. It's really at the heart of what he's doing here. Would he be imagining to get out? Would he, I mean, if there is a playful manner in him, which I think there is, he's becoming a performer in an oblique way.
And Martin Steinflick is here and also enjoyed listening to you and has a question.
Well, the third proposition for homoiotes. At the beginning of the text you have tosauta men peripaidion, which is a sort of clausula of catalog.
Yes.
So if there is some performance of erudition, like in Athenaeus, then this could be as well a syntax of catalog, because in a catalog you have to put together similar things, but not the same. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. This is an excellent point. I agree. I mean, I think this is definitely a possibility. It makes me go to, I mean, I'm going to push it really hard, and I'm going to make it very speculative, but it's interesting to me that in moments when we have in archaic lyric, or in archaic epic, say for example the Homeric hymn to Demeter, where we do have the word paizomen. We often have lists there, like lists of plants, lists of the girls who were playing with Persephone at the time of her abduction. So there's something with lists. I can't quite pin it down, but there's something on the playful, and there's something on the playful which connects it to lists. So I like your point a lot, and I agree. Yeah.
Any questions?
Please. No, I probably just found a point. Oh, yes. Can you see me? Okay. Hi. I probably found a point which make the parallel to the beginning of this section in Book 9, and that's the Book 5, paragraph 103. And Pollux says,
I have it in my ear. Okay, got it, my first point.
Please. And Pollux says, Katadevlesetai de min kuden kaiton synonymon onomaton. And from that point on, that's to say, I will freely translated, I will go without any order through a list of synonyms. And from this point up to the end of the book, that's to say about at least 50 chapters, there are just lists of synonyms. just listing that without without an order. And he says that. Kiden.
Without any macro structure.
I just getting materials together.
And the same is at the end of the 6th book.
Yes.
When he's done with the symposium, the book is almost half, and he has to fill up the space.
Yes.
So
and something similar happens.
he says that.
Yes. Yes, just
In order not to leave the book incomplete.
But and something similar also in the Byzantine age. Sexes.
Yes, exactly.
Because they don't want to lose space. And at the end of book 1, Pollux uses the same verb of prostitemi. If you, he says, I get to the end of this book, and I wanted to add something about the. Where is it? About kinegetica, about
The chase.
Thank you. Chase. I was just thinking to the German word. That's why. Yeah. And but if you want, Commodus, I will add in the future also these things. And so if leave the question open, it will add some other books and other materials to what you already collected. So it's just a methodology of accumulation,
Yes.
a rhetorical tool, so to say, probably. We shouldn't forget the rhetorical aspect.
Absolutely.
It was a sophist.
Absolutely. And in a way, this has been part of my thinking, and I kind of started, not really elaborated on it. I mean, part of the sophistes, the earlier step, is the notion of winning, right? Yeah. And just like a sophist wants to take over, wants to win, in a way he is this excessive accumulation, making sure that he doesn't almost forget one, is a kind of winning. So there is a connection that can be made with these games. I mean, if he sees it as a game, I mean, to the extent that we can call it the game like a Scrabble, he has to absolutely cover anything that is available. This is the only thing that he will make him win the game of rhetoric, so to speak. I'm using it rhetorically too, though, so that's a problem. Yeah.
Other questions? So, thank you very much.
Us, I will just disconnect the screen because I need my computer, and for very few words of conclusion, you don't need to present.
Okay.
And I hope, so I will just put out the thing here, but you will listen to me.
Yeah, but I can listen to you, yeah. It worked out so seamlessly this time.
Yes, exactly. So let's say, I just go through what we talked today, very quickly. Thanks to Renzo Tosi first, we discussed this very peculiar position of Pollux in midway between lexicography, encyclopedia, but focused on onomastic with a structural onomastic structure. So very characteristics, and you discuss also the way Pollux operates selection, motivated by this linguistic viewpoint to teach the right words. And about proverbs, in fact, he's not very interested in proverbs. That's what you showed to us. But he's interested by the semantic field, and so aligning all kinds of terms in the same semantic field. So you showed the case of Kundalismos, the play with a stick. There is a proverb, un clou chasse l'autre. I don't know how you say it in English. Un clou chasse l'autre. And